Hello, friends. What's going on, everyone? My socks on. What's up? How's everyone doing? This has been a very eventful past few days in Knicks world with all these reports and rumors. I'm going to get to all of them, and I'm also going to rank the guys I want the Knicks to go out and get for their next head coach. And I've got 5 names. I'm going to get into those, but first I wanted to address a lot of the rumors swirling around Knicks world right now. I know that there are a multitude. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. I'm going to get to the ones that I feel like have the most validity because there's a lot of shit being thrown out right now that I don't necessarily believe. And there are a few things that, I've heard things and I'm going to either confirm or deny the stuff that I'm about to read. Because I've heard some rumblings of other stuff, and now a bunch is coming out right now because obviously there's just, so many things going on with the Knicks front office. There are, you could just see it from all these differing reports. Clearly, there are people behind the scenes throwing stuff out, talking to different sources and reporters and saying different things than other people. You look at what happened with, it's hilarious. The two guys, obviously, who essentially, according to them, created Sports Talk Radio, Mad Dog Russo and Mike Francesa, both of them coming on their show, Mike Francesa's podcast, and Chris Russo on Sirius XM, essentially saying two completely different things. Mike saying that Leon Rose was the one guy behind the Tom Thibodeau firing, and Chris Russo, Mad Dog, saying that it was all James Dolan. I thought that was hilarious. And that told me a lot. That told me all I need to know about what actually happened behind the scenes there. I think that it was a Dolan thing. I said that the other day, and I'm going to get into more of why I think that later on here. But I do think that hearing those two differing reports, and who really knows how tapped into the Knicks both of those guys are, they're clearly watched, all right? They were legends of the game. They were legends of Sports Talk Radio. Yeah, they definitely influence the majority of people who are currently Sports Talk Radio hosts, but they're both up there in age. I don't know how much Chris Russo, Mad Dog, still follows the Knicks. He came across as a huge casual on First Take. He did mention the fact that Leon Rose never should have let Isaiah Hartenstein leave. Little does he know that the reason why he left had nothing to do with what Leon Rose is offering him, and Leon Rose, if he could have, would have retained Isaiah Hartenstein. So that was one thing. He was the one who said that Dolan was behind it. I tend to agree with him more. I trust his source a little bit more than Mike Francesa. Mike Francesa does not have the best track record of being right, but hearing both of those differing reports from Mad Dog and Francesa, again, told me a lot about what's going on behind the scenes. And that is pure chaos and dysfunction. I read a report from Michael Kay, and you could say whatever you want about Michael Kay. He's the Yankees guy, yada, yada, yada. He happens to be best friends with Mike Breen. And, you could say what you want about him. He's been a New York Sports Talk Radio host for years now. And he had this report that I think is very interesting. And let me see if I can find this. But it was reported essentially that World Wide Wes was the one who was behind all. Okay, here we go. This is directly from Michael Kay. It was posted by @NBA Trade Report, which isn't that reputable, but it's quoting Michael Kay, and it says Tibbs lost a power struggle with World Wide Wes, who convinced Dolan and essentially went over Leon's head. Another factor: the front office below Leon resented Tibbs getting the credit for the turnaround. If they made a suggestion he didn't like, he would call them out, so they felt disrespected. Thus, they spread the narrative that no one wanted to work with an old grumpy man. Only getting to the finals would have saved his job. I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether it's right or wrong. I don't know shit. I don't know a thing. But after all the things that we've read and heard, isn't this the most plausible explanation for what happened behind the scenes? This would explain the differing reports being put out there by the talking heads of the media, right? This would signal that some people have heard things from one side of the front office and other people have heard stuff from the other side of the front office. And this would signal massive discord within the Knicks brass. If what Michael Kay is reporting is true, that means Leon Rose and World Wide Wes are nowhere near as close as we assume they were. I think most of the Knicks fans assumed that both these guys were working hand in hand. But now that I hear that, it shows me that Leon Rose, the president of basketball operations, might not have as much influence as we all assumed that he did. Obviously, as the head of basketball operations for a team, you'd think he calls the shots, right? This report from Michael Kay signals a completely different story. So I think it's something to watch. Michael Kay, again, he's a pretty polarizing figure. Again, has been a New York sports talk radio host for 20 plus years. He's best friends with Mike Breen. Not saying Mike Breen has sources like that. I mean, I would assume so. But it's very interesting, to say the least, what Michael Kay had to put out there. And there's been a bunch else. It's not just that, even though I think that's the most interesting report. Another one that came out, players are fed up with Rick Brunson. And they thought Rick Brunson had way too much power within the organization. And this is the least surprising report I've ever read in my entire life, because obviously these NBA players have huge egos. Think about how this was like. I mean, I could attest to it. I could speak firsthand to it. My dad coached the majority of teams when I was growing up. And I could see the resentment building from my teammates, even though I had asked my dad specifically at a young age, don't start me. I'd like to come off the bench. I'd like to be the sixth man. Even then, I still felt the resentment from my teammates. Your dad's the coach. You clearly have preferential treatment when it comes to minutes and offensive scheming, whatever. And this was 6th, 7th grade. So imagine what it's like at the pro level with the egos that these guys have and how hard they busted their ass to get to this point. And now one of the players has his dad coaching the team. And his dad is the associate head coach next to Tom Thibodeau. And I knew this months ago. I heard it. And, again, it totally made sense to me. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. Clearly, the players were not happy with Rick Brunson's role as the head assistant coach for the Knicks under Tom Thibodeau. So all of this being put together, Jalen Brunson takes a massive pay cut, $110+ million. Rick Brunson is the head assistant coach. Tom Thibodeau is still the head coach. Jalen Brunson, after Game 6, backing up Tom Thibodeau as much as anyone could as a star player on a team, discrediting exactly what the reporter said in the question that he posed to Jalen Brunson, saying, what kind of question is that? You're seriously asking me that? Newsflash, Tom Thibodeau was fired 48 hours later. So clearly, Jalen Brunson does not wield the power within the organization that we thought he did. And this report from Michael Kay kind of echoes exactly what I'm trying to get at right here, which is that Jalen Brunson, Rick Brunson, Tom Thibodeau as an extension, even though he's fired, and Leon Rose do not have the power that we thought they had in this organization. Why is that important? Well, because Jalen Brunson, unprecedentedly, and this was, included in the original tweet by Adrian Wojnarowski, who is out of the media game now, but he was the one who reported the Jalen Brunson contract extension that was, again, 110 or however much less than what he could have taken in this offseason. And he said in that tweet, in a largely unprecedented move, Jalen Brunson takes an extension this year instead of next season. Do you want to know why any player in sports takes a deal like that? Because they assume that they have power within that organization. They assume that because people close to them are employed by said team, that they could take a deal like that because they have the power to get what they want. And not long after, I guess it might have been before, it probably was a little bit before, the Knicks went out and traded an exorbitant sum for Mikal Bridges. And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist as well for that to assume that Jalen Brunson was behind that trade and he was the one who pushed for that trade to be made. So at first, after that, that deal that Jalen Brunson made, which again was unprecedented in sports history, not just NBA history, sports history, a player taking that much less money, it was clear that Jalen Brunson had the power. It was clear that in Tom Thibodeau's offense, Jalen Brunson had the autonomy to do whatever the hell he wanted, to operate in his own way without repercussions from the head coach or from the head assistant coach because that was his dad. And you heard, from a bunch of Knicks talking heads. And with this too, it didn't take a rocket scientist to realize. And you just look at, the majority of the players' body language, but you could sense that the players on that team, on this Knicks team, were not happy with the roles that they had within the offense. And you heard it after the season. Essentially, the reason why Tom Thibodeau was fired, and this was said by CP the franchise, that players didn't understand their roles. And Frank Isola said this, and I disagree with a lot of what Frank Isola says. I think he was a mouthpiece for Tom Thibodeau. But he said, and to translate what CP said, that a player saying that they didn't understand their roles was essentially players saying that they didn't like their roles. So putting all this together, it's pretty clear that players were not happy with their roles within Tom Thibodeau's offense and his team. And you may think that this is just the bench. It might be rookies and guys who don't play. Who has the validity? Who has the power to even get that report out? If not even PJ Tucker, if Cam Payne is saying something like that, do you really think it's going to be reported? No. That has to come from someone like Karl-Anthony Towns. It has to come from someone like Mikal Bridges. We obviously heard before that Trailblazers game in March what Mikal Bridges had to say about Tom Thibodeau playing the starters too much. That was the first red flag in all this. And I can't for 1 second imagine a reality in which Mikal Bridges was brought in for his end-of-season meeting with James Dolan present, where he didn't say anything bad about Tom Thibodeau. He had nothing to say about Tom Thibodeau's lineups, how much he played him, etc. He absolutely said something. And I think Karl-Anthony Towns by extension. So believe whatever you want to believe. Leon Rose had nothing to do with this. Nothing. And Michael Kay's report signals all of this. And everything I just said backs up and listen, this is not matter of fact. This is what I truly believe in. Like, I believe it's 95, 96%. Again, I'm not a reputable source. You could believe whatever you want to believe. I'm just piecing together information, putting it into chat GPT and asking for a recap. A little essay of all the things that I've seen. And I'm spitting it out to you here. These are my conclusions based off all the different reports that I've seen. Leon Rose has little to no power within the organization. And Worldwide West was the one who got Tom Thibodeau fired. And we knew, and this is something that I said repeatedly at first, we knew that Tom Thibodeau and Leon Rose had an extremely close relationship. And Jalen Brunson, who obviously his godfather is Leon Rose, backed him up as much as a star player could back up a coach after Game 6. And then 48 hours later, he's fired? Didn't add up to me whatsoever. Did not. So those are my thoughts on and I kind of got into this a little bit less in depth on Tuesday when, around like 2.5 hours after Tom Thibodeau was fired. Didn't really have much time to fully process everything that happened. Didn't really have much time to get across all of my thoughts. This is what I'm trying to do here. If you're just joining now, thanks. I'm Bryce Gelman, and I'm discussing my thoughts on why Tom Thibodeau was fired and, by extension, the biggest Knicks rumors floating around, because all of those have to do with Tom Thibodeau's fire. It's almost like you forget that there's an NBA Finals Game 1 to be played tonight with all of the reporting that's going on surrounding the Knicks firing Tom Thibodeau. And obviously, we're all kind of in a bubble here when it comes to being fans of the Knicks. In my case, both being a fan and also covering the team, and how I can cover. Listen, I'm no beat reporter. I don't have a byline when it comes to the Knicks. I talk about the Knicks. So by extension, I cover them, right? So, from people who are involved in this sphere, Knicks fans, media, everyone, clearly this is the biggest talking point in our lives. And I think by extension, the NBA too. There's not really much dialogue going on about the NBA Finals. I think that'll change tonight when Game 1 is played, but I digress. There are a lot of people who are laser focused in on this Tom Thibodeau thing. And you see it all across Knicks Twitter. They love the fire. They love it. And then if you talk to anyone who really covers the game, and this includes the casuals as well, like the mad dogs of the world that clearly do not watch every game and are mainly talking heads, they don't like Tom Thibodeau being fired. And I've talked to a multitude of people that cover the game, that know it like the back of their hands. They thought Tom Thibodeau was the man for the job. And I've laid it out repeatedly, and I've harped on this point a multitude of times here on these live streams. I think Tom Thibodeau deserved to be fired. I thought he refused to adapt. The Knicks went out and traded for Karl-Anthony Towns to start utilizing a 5-out offense. I've said it again a bunch of times now recently. The NBA is a copycat league. With the Knicks trading for Karl-Anthony Towns, they signaled, hey, we're trying to win the exact same way that Boston won last year. With the utmost spacing and free-flowing offense that we could possibly have. And I think the Knicks were limited when it came to fully utilizing that offensive strategy with Tom Thibodeau as the head coach. That is not a part of his philosophy. It's never been an offense that he's run for any one of his teams. And also, he loved Josh Hart so much that he insisted on playing him 35, 40 minutes a game. And when you do that, especially when you play him alongside Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns as much as he did, you're sacrificing all the spacing that you acquired when you traded for Karl-Anthony Towns. So there was no point in playing Josh Hart that much, considering what the Knicks gave up for Karl-Anthony Towns. So it made zero sense to me. And it frustrated me to no end watching Josh Hart getting as many minutes as he did down the stretch of that season. You know, throughout that Eastern Conference Finals against the Pacers, watching Josh Hart play meaningless minute after meaningless minute after meaningless minute after meaningless minute, and not watching the Knicks maximize what they had offensively. And I've agreed to disagree with a bunch of people, again, that cover the team, that talk about the team, that know more about basketball than me, who thought that Tom Thibodeau was the right coach for the job. I didn't agree. And when it first came out that the Knicks fired him, I was very excited. I was happy about the possibility because what Sham said, it sounded like Leon Rose was the one behind it, which meant that he put aside his personal relationship with Tom Thibodeau to fire him. And as more and more has come out, it has become ever more evident, if that phrase is correct, that Leon Rose was not behind this move, that this was a James Dolan decision. And of course, like, it's an owner. It's an NBA owner. He's, of course, going to make the final decision on things. But if you really look at this in depth, again, with what Jalen Brunson said after Game 6, and with the relationship that Tom Thibodeau and Leon Rose have, it never made sense to me that he was fired that quickly after the season. I don't think that there was ever a time, and I never really believed in this, that Leon Rose was dead set on firing Tom Thibodeau. It never seemed like that was the case. And I think I was blinded when it originally happened, when Tom Thibodeau was fired. Of like, well, you know, Leon Rose might have done it that quickly because Johnny Bryant is one of the 2 finalists for the Suns job, and he wanted to pounce on this quickly so he can get Johnny Bryant or whatever. I don't think the Knicks had a backup plan. I just think they decided Worldwide West got in Leon Rose's, or got in James Dolan's ear and said, hey, let's fire this guy. Because it was clear that Tom Thibodeau had his detractors within the Knicks organization. That clearly not everyone was a fan of Tom Thibodeau. When Tom Thibodeau made that lineup change in Game 3, it screamed, this is what the front office wants. And if that's what the front office wanted at Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Final, don't you think they'd be saying that the entire season long, especially throughout the playoffs? Absolutely. So again, I'm a little concerned about this now, because if James Dolan is the driving force behind the majority of these decisions being made within the Knicks front office, we might be screwed, ladies and gentlemen. I think James Dolan has done an amazing job creating this completely different image of himself as an owner. his PR team has been working overtime to completely change how he's viewed by the Knicks fans and by the general public. When I know for a fact, working for Sirius XM NBA radio, that he has not changed much because the Knicks PR team is impossible to deal with. And you still see reporters and, people for MSG Network afraid to criticize the Knicks brass, specifically James Dolan. You hear a guy like Michael Kay or whomever on Yes Network, and they can be very critical of the Yankees organization and Brian Cashman and everyone else at times. And what you see from the guys who work for MSG, the guys who cover the Knicks, the Bondis, the Begleys, the Poppers of the world, listen, they do a great job. They do an amazing job. There's no better beat reporters throughout the country covering any team than the Knicks beat reporters. But it feels like at times they're afraid to say, what actually might be out there in fear of getting their credentials revoked and screwing over their companies. Because if you get your credential revoked, you can't cover the Knicks. You can't be in there to ask questions. You can't watch Knicks games in person. At that point, you essentially don't have a job. So I think you've seen a bunch of these beat reporters towing the line when it comes to reporting on the Knicks. Because I think all the dots connect to James Dolan being behind this decision. And yet you have zero reporters saying, Knicks beat reporters saying that that's the case. And that screams to me that they're afraid for their jobs to criticize James Dolan. And I think that this whole notion of James Dolan being this hands-off owner and having no say in basketball decisions should be put to bed. I don't think that theory is plausible anymore. And it's very unfortunate because as a Knicks fan, I wanted to be happy about Tom Thibodeau's firing. I thought that that was the right move. And now as I piece shit together, it has become evident to me that the wrong people are behind these decisions. And it remains to be seen what the Knicks do. And I'm going to get into this now. I'm going to transition here, shift gears into the guys that I want as head coaches. And it's tough. It's tough now because it changes everything. We can't trust these guys. If this is Dolan behind the moves, if he's not giving Leon Rose the leash to be able to make his own decisions, how can we trust anyone within the organization? It gives me little hope that this team will be successful going forward if James Dolan has as much power as he used to. We forced the Melo trade, all the other things that he screwed up throughout the course of his tenure as owner of the Knicks. But let's get into it. I want to talk about my top 5 coaches, starting with number 5, Mike Brown. Mike Brown, currently unemployed, was fired from the Kings, someone who turned around the Kings organization and was someone who was looked upon as one of the top coaches in the NBA before his untimely firing. He was amongst a myriad of coaches who were fired throughout the course of the second half of the season. Taylor Jenkins, Mike Malone, guys who at the time you never thought were going to be fired. So, Mike Brown, coach of the year in 2023. Can't take that away from him. And he's one of the multitude of head coaches who were fired who won coach of the year. Budenholzer being another one. Monty Williams being another. Like, there have been so many different coaches who did an amazing job with where they were. Dwayne Casey being another one, who were fired for whatever reasons from their the teams they won coach of the year. Tom Thibodeau now being another one. But I've always liked Mike Brown as a head coach. And there are clearly extremely high expectations for any coach who's going to take the reins from Tom Thibodeau here. And you're going to kind of need to have a coach who's dealt with a lot of BS before to come in and do a good job. Mike Brown could be one of those guys. I really like Mike Brown. I always have. Did a great job with the Cavs, was the associate head coach of the Warriors, 3-time NBA champion with the Warriors. Can't take that away from him. Number 4, Mike Malone. And I'm sure he's a lot higher on everyone's list when it comes to the potential next head coach of the Knicks. There is an obvious tie to Mike Malone and the Knicks. And let me say Michael Malone. He likes to be called Michael Malone. I don't know. So I'm going to call him Michael Malone. But Mike Malone, this is going to be a problem. Hopefully he doesn't get the job. Then I'm not going to be able to screw this up every time. Michael Malone, Queens native. His dad worked for the Knicks. Also, Michael Malone was an assistant coach for the Knicks from 2001 to 2005. So the ties are very evident. This makes sense. Michael Malone, an NBA champion head coach. He did lose the locker room of the Nuggets. I think that there were a multitude of reasons behind his firing, including that one being the number one reason. Another one of those reasons was he struggled to coach the team, and he didn't play a lot of players like Tom Thibodeau because the bench sucked. I mean, listen, the front office of the Nuggets did not do a great job putting the needed pieces around Nikola Jokic to help them win another championship. And I think Michael Malone had to deal with that. And he didn't do a great job at dealing with that, alienated his entire locker room, and got fired a couple of weeks before the playoffs. That was a massive deal around NBA circles. You think people were surprised when Tom Thibodeau was fired? Just look at the reactions to Michael Malone's firing late on in the season, about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. So that was pretty insane. Michael Malone, good option, someone who could do a good job in the face of the amount of criticism that the next Knicks head coach will face and the amount of expectations that they'll face as the head coach. Again, after the Knicks went to Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals and their head coach, who was one of the most successful in franchise history, was canned. He could do a good job of that. Number 3, Jason Kidd. I know a lot of people think that this is unrealistic or unlikely, but you're now starting to see it from a multitude of sources, from a multitude of different reporters. All work for different organizations, who've all reported different things in the past, who all clearly have different sources. The stars are aligning when it comes to Jason Kidd's potential hiring as the next Knicks head coach. There are ties with this one too. Jason Kidd played for the Knicks in his last season of his career in 2012, 2013. He's coached in New York, albeit for the Nets, a team in which the head coach faces a lot less scrutiny. He did coach that team with Paul Pierce, KG. So he's had experience coaching in New York. Again, this is a completely different animal with the Knicks as compared to the Nets, especially after the Knicks just made, again, as I'm going to keep harping this, I'm going to keep hammering this home. The Knicks just made the sixth game of the Eastern Conference Finals. The expectations will be drastically different for Jason Kidd as the head coach of the Knicks than it ever was for him as the head coach of the Nets. That's objectively true. So Jason Kidd, my number 3. I think that he'd do an amazing job, becoming the Knicks head coach and dealing with these expectations. I also think that him leaving the Mavs is a little bit more plausible than you may think. I think that Nico Harrison and Patrick Dumont did not inform Jason Kidd about their eventual trade, the trading of Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis and other assets. And I think Jason Kidd might be fed up with what he may perceive as a lack of support from ownership in order to win. Yes, they just won the lottery. Yes, he'd have a chance to coach an uber talented team. A team that's point guard is currently out, with Kyrie Irving being out for the foreseeable future. But I think it's much more plausible than you may think that Jason Kidd comes over to the Knicks. Now, will the Mavericks be okay with them interviewing Jason Kidd and potentially poaching him to come to the Knicks? That's another story. And that's something we don't know about. That's why the odds of this happening are not that high. But they're real. They're real. There are people behind the scenes that think that there is smoke to this rumor. So Jason Kidd, my number 3. Number 2, and if you've been following me for a while, if you've been watching my live streams, my wet dream for the Knicks head coach has always been Jay Wright. I don't know how well his coaching methods and styles would translate to the NBA game. It's way different in college. You have to manage these personalities. They're kids. They're college kids. NBA players' egos are obviously 10 times bigger than these college players. And I think things have changed in the NIL era, and Jay Wright got out right before, shit hit the fan. But it's very difficult in the NBA to deal with egos like it is when it comes to dealing with them in college. And, Danny Hurley continues to, for whatever reason, be a candidate for open head coaching roles. His coaching is not going to translate whatsoever to the NBA game. You think, looking at how psycho he is when it comes to dealing with the refs, dealing with his players, that will translate well to the NBA? He'd have half of his team requesting trades. Jay Wright, obviously, the stoicism behind him on the sideline. If you watch the Chris Jenkins game-winning shot to win the national championship in 2016, just look at his reaction. He's a professional. He knows the game of basketball. I don't think he'll ever come out of retirement. It seems like he's very happy with what he's doing on TV, covering March Madness, whatever he's doing. So a bunch of people who know him, talk to him daily on a regular basis, think that there's no chance that he'd ever come out of retirement, even, to coach 3 of his former players in Hart, Brunson, and Mikal Bridges. So I think that's unlikely. I don't think that's going to happen. My number one option is Johnny Bryant. And I think that might be the most likely option at this point if the Michael K. rumor is true. If Worldwide West was the one who convinced James Dolan to fire Tom Thibodeau, because Worldwide West was the one that brought Johnny Bryant to the Knicks and was a driving force behind him becoming the associate head coach of the Knicks under Tom Thibodeau. So he clearly likes Johnny Bryant. Will he get his way again with James Dolan? That remains to be seen. But I think it's important when you hire another head coach after firing someone who was so instrumental in the team's success and team building the culture that it possesses right now, that there's continuity from that head coach to the next one. Johnny Bryant coached under Tom Thibodeau for 4 seasons. You couldn't get more continuity than that. Then he leaves, takes a lateral, has a lateral move over to the Cleveland Cavaliers under Kenny Atkinson, who, in my opinion, is one of the best offensive minds in the NBA and is the associate head coach for one of the best offensive teams in NBA history. Not only does he have experience under Tom Thibodeau and the defensive side of things when it comes to the defensive mastermind and genius that is Tom Thibodeau, but he also has some offensive experience under Kenny Atkinson. 2 drastically different coaches with 2 drastically different philosophies. And you want to know what worked for the Cavs the entire year? A 5-out spaced offense. Who knows? He may implement that with the Knicks. You may see a lot of success there. The biggest knock on Johnny Bryant is he's never been an NBA head coach before. That he'd be taking over and taking a head coaching role that as I've said a multitude of times on here, has a lot of freaking pressure. Has a lot of pressure attached to it. The head coach before, who was just fired, made it to Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals, and then was fired. You think that the front office is going to be okay? Johnny Bryant comes in. The Knicks flame out in the first round? No, they won't. I think Johnny Bryant's hiring would be a much easier pill to swallow if he brings in an extremely reputable former NBA head coach to be his head assistant. JJ Redick did something very similar. All the guys that he brought in. I don't know if Johnny Bryant's going to want to do that. He may go rogue. He may say, this is my job now. I call the shots. And if they hire him, what do they do? Fire him immediately after? I don't know if they'll have a lot of control over him. They didn't have any control over Tom Thibodeau, and that's part of the reason why they fired him. So listen, Johnny Bryant, my number one. Again, it's going to be very difficult for him to deal with the expectations that come with being the coach for a team that just fired its previous head coach after making Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. It would also be difficult for him to deal with the scrutiny and the pressure of coaching in New York with the media. That would really be insane for his first head coaching role. But we've seen it. We've seen it with coaches getting fired after winning seasons and first-time head coaches being hired. It's worked in the past. Steve Kerr is the one that comes to mind. Steve Kerr had less experience as an assistant coach than Johnny Bryant did. Steve Kerr was actively commentating for the NBA on TNT. He was in NBA 2K as a commentator. That's where he was. Johnny Bryant, my number one choice. Again, there's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of scrutiny that comes along with it. But if World Wide West gets his way again, like he did with the Tom Thibodeau firing, I think that Johnny Bryant will be the next head coach of the New York Knicks. So it remains to be seen. I'll obviously be discussing this a lot more as the days and weeks go on. Hopefully the Knicks make a decision sooner rather than later because, there is the NBA draft coming up, and you'd like to have a coach before you make a selection in the NBA draft. Again, it remains to be seen, but I would really hope that it's Johnny Bryant because I'm a huge fan of him, and I think he'd be good for the job. That's just me. Other people out there don't think he'd do good. Don't think he'd do well because of obviously him being a first-time head coach and the expectations. Yada yada yada. All right, this was fun as always. Stay tuned. I've got more stuff coming your way. Knicks, one giant step coming out this week. So stay tuned for all that. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a good weekend. See you.